welcome to episode 17 of the Tavern Chat podcast. I'm your host, Eric Tenkar, bartender and proprietor at the Tenkar's Tavern blog. Today we're delving back into the AD&D First Edition Dungeon Master's Guide. I always found it interesting to try to find solo activities out of the DMG, and you could do so. One of the things that I did as a teenager was, especially on trips, was to sit in the back seat with a deck of cards and the Dungeon Master's Guide, and have a first level fighter or first level thief who suddenly found a deck of many things, and everybody got 4 pulls, and see who could live, who could die, who could come out with the most. Because you were pulling cards. If you got a minor death pulled, let's see, you knew the guy was dead. If anything required combat with a first level character on the deck of many things, you knew it was over and done with. But it was fun to see if you got, wishes, 50,000 experience points, a keep. Your first level fighter gains the service of a 4th level fighter. Things are good. I mean, I never actually use these PCs or these first level characters or these instantly dead if they pulled the wrong card characters in a game as a PC. But even back then, they were useful for NPCs, a little bit more powerful than the players would expect for their perceived level. But it was always a little fun, and it was fun because Deck of Many Things was scary as hell to actually find in a dungeon, a campaign, because it literally could kill you. It was one of the things that had some great rewards, but it's bad to roll the card, or of the cards. You got to choose anywhere from 1 to 4, but you had to announce before you started. So if you got a great card at the beginning, it didn't mean that you could suddenly stop. You had to keep on going, and it's like a little bit like Russian roulette. Sooner or later, you gotta pull something bad. But yeah, I should say I always had fun running it as a little solo uh, activity, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But not only that, DMG included rules for doing random dungeons. And these random dungeon rules, it reminds me, I guess, in my later... I never... When I was a teen, and even in my college years, I saw basic D&D as, the kiddie D&D, basic D&D. I was playing advanced. So I never really saw the geomorphs back then. I didn't get a chance to experience B1 and B2 in my formative years. I know it was a shame. But, when you had to go to Thanksgiving or Christmas dinner at your aunt's house, and you were the only teenager there, and you didn't really want to participate in the family discussions about the family dirt, or what you weren't supposed to hear anyway. So I'd always bring my DMG and some graph paper, and I would start out rolling some random dungeons. Sometimes I would bring my player's handbook and have a party of first level characters and try to use the solo rules that went with it, but that didn't really work too well. But rolling these random dungeons was a good way to pass the time, and it was the reality of Holy Christmas. I mean, when you're looking at the expectation of how many monsters you're going to come across, I always thought that it was like when you looked at one of the tournament adventures in AD&D, the A series, the G series, where practically every room had something. whether it was a monster or a trap or just something for you to remark at. And here we have the random dungeon generator. If you go to table V5, chamber or room contents, and you're rolling a 20, a 20-sided die. On a result of 1 to 12, the room is empty. Nada. So that's a lot. That's 60% of your rooms are according to these charts. And when I was younger, it was like, really, this is how my dungeon is supposed to be? Because it's not how the dungeons that they were publishing were. At least not to my eyes. 13 to 14 is a monster only. No treasure. 15, 16, 17, monster and treasure. So you have a 25% chance to actually have an encounter. A 1 in 20 chance of something special, which is either a stairway or a slanting path. It was bringing you up or down to another level. On a 19, it was a trick or a trap. And 20, it was a treasure. But don't expect the treasure just be sitting there in a corner waiting for you to pick it up. The treasure was there to be hidden or stored in something and have a trap, or it was never quite as easy as you might think it would be to get. So, my solo adventures on these holidays usually just resulted in me generating these random dungeons. But then I learned something else from these random dungeons that didn't quite fit with the way a lot of the adventures that you purchased or looked like. When you got purchased adventures, when you had D&D modules or AD&D modules, there was very little empty space on those maps. But these random adventures, these random dungeons generated by default a lot of empty space. These things were spread out. I still think of Frank Metzner's Lich Dungeon, which he was Ent Enterprises or whatever it was. And this came out, I don't know, 5, 6 years ago. And it was Frank doing his take on a classic dungeon, and I don't think the square map had one unused hex that wasn't part of the dungeon. Not even everything was used, and that's pretty much how we were as a default when I was playing AD&D. Because graph paper cost money. The stuff wasn't cheap. If you could find, somebody in the family who came across some weird graph paper with, 10 hexes to an inch, you used it and figured out a way to read it later. Which I certainly did. But you didn't want to have that much empty space on your graph paper, on your map, because then it's less adventuring in the same amount of space. So there's a lot of interesting stuff I thought, though, about the random dungeon generator, because even if I didn't use it to randomly generate dungeons, it gave you ideas about, oh yeah, you know what? I could put a magic pool in, or I could put a pool in that's not magical, but it's there. It makes you think about, caves and, well, not underground lakes, because underground lakes are pretty big, but and it let you think about traps. Like, yes, I used to read Grimtooth's traps for the traps that nobody in the right mind would A, use, or B, ever think of, because they were just above and beyond. But to have traps listed on these random dungeon generation tables was good. It was inspirational for when I wanted to do my own dungeon, and I wasn't necessarily going to roll the dungeon, but I could go and go, oh yeah, all right, we got pit traps. We have a room that descends. We can have a wall that comes from behind and blocks them in the passageway, makes them go forward. There's flaming oil or non-flaming oil, poisonous gas, illusionary walls, chutes. There was so much stuff that I wouldn't have thought of on my own, but I could go to these tables and draw inspiration. And I'll be honest with you, I think that most random generation tables, whether we're looking at the back of the DMG or the D30 Sandbox or the D30 GM Companion or Matt Finch's Tome of Adventure Design. Yeah, these all these random tables. They're there for inspiration. Sure, you can roll on them and run as rolled, kind of like run as written. But that is not the point. The point is to find something that's coherent, and in doing so, uh, I think a lot of times, yes, you can roll and it's inspiration, but I find a lot more inspiration just reading through the tables and I was saying, looking at where's the treasure hidden by? Secret space under a container, with a secret compartment within the container, uh, behind a loose stone on the wall. All these things are inspirational. And maybe you're going to go off the table and say, well, you know what? Those are good ideas, but I can go beyond it. That's even better. But it means at the table, it helped you expand what your perception was, what what your limits were, and that's great. And I think that's one of the strengths of the DMG was the tables. Again, not so much for rolling on them. I don't, necessarily say that was the way everybody should have done it, but to pick and choose from it and to see the general percentages. I mean, again, to say that 60% of rooms are empty, that's a huge amount of space. And as a teenager, it was a huge amount of wasted space. Because empty rooms are XP for my players. It's not monsters, it's not treasures, it's not traps. And yes, I know that there was supposed to be some of that. Well, you don't know if there's something behind the door. So it's all, everybody gets a little tense as a, no. After a while, it just becomes, all right, another empty room, move on to the next one. And that's when, even as a young DM, I realized, all right, I got to start flushing out even empty rooms. And I had a few. But I started using graffiti in dungeons early on just to get my players thinking out of the box. Well, that is where I'm going to end the DMG discussion today. I'm definitely going to come back to it. There's a lot here. I had a little early warning stress when I got up and got to my desk. My computer had like an error message. I had to reboot it, and then I tried to shut it down. It wouldn't shut down. I had to do a hard reboot, and then my iMac got into a stuck on boot deal. So yeah, I apparently have solved the problem, but now I'm nervous going forward. It's gonna be fun at North Texas, but all I can think about is maybe when I come home, I gotta buy a new desktop. Not fun. I'm just rambling, folks. It is still early here in New York City this Saturday morning. Um, Tomorrow, you know what? Not even going to mention what I'm going to talk about tomorrow. You'll see it when at least with the title tomorrow. Should be fun. Again, folks, as always, thank you for joining me. Thank you for listening to me ramble. Stay safe. God bless, and I'll talk to you soon.
Hiya, folks. This is Old Man Grognard, Glenn Hallstrom, saying I love listening to Tavern Chat. It's where I hang my hat, and you should too.